Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. I'm very happy to be joined today by Terrie Schauer. Hi, Terrie.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to do this with you.
Me too. And look, there's so many ways to introduce you, but I'll start with the most straightforward, okay? It's going to be a fairly long list. So, you have been a very successful and foremost real estate investor. And then you wrote a fabulous book about it that I hope we will talk about a little bit later. And then you are about to launch a podcast that you've been working on for a while. And all of this, we are getting together here today because a couple of weeks ago, you put out an amazing, very simple Instagram post that really made me click. And that's when I reached out and really wanted to share that with you because I think a lot of other people can benefit from it. So first of all, well, welcome to the show again. And I almost wish I could like show the post, but maybe I'll read it instead. I'll describe it. Look, we've all been home for a little over a year, and a couple of weeks ago, you posted that about networking and in real estate is a people business, and how do we go about meeting new people? Or we used to go to online events and network around a beer and so on, but we can't do that anymore. And so for a lot of people, it's been rather difficult. And the information that you put out there had like 6 major points, and I hope we can focus on that a little bit today, and then we'll talk about all your other successful ventures. But there's a flurry of Zoom calls about real estate that have happened, but people come and they attend and they don't contribute, they don't ask questions, they just kind of listen and then they leave. And I don't think that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, but so I mean, I think there's there's the COVID world, and then there's the world that existed before and the world that existed after.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now we're kind of in this moment where the light is visible at the end of the tunnel. And I think maybe in September we're going to start thinking about with our COVID PTSD, how we go about re-entering actual face-to-face interactions. So, I think that's kind of one thing. And then what we have, either how we've survived this year and what we've been able to maybe make out of it. Because I think, we had a little bit of a pre-discussion off camera, but one of the things that I wanted to say is, yes, launching the podcast, and yes, in my business life, some good things have happened this year. But when I say COVID PTSD, it's actually not a joke. I'm one of those people who has little kids at home, and my husband works in the evenings. And so I've spent a lot of this year by myself in my house, shut away from people. And even though, business becomes a vehicle, or real estate becomes a vehicle to feel like some of those connections are still alive, it's been a very difficult socially, a very difficult year. And I think no matter what strategies we put in place to keep the networks alive, nobody's coming out of this 100%.
No, definitely. And I always like to turn around and be like, okay, well then what do we do about it? Or how do we decide to grow? How do we move forward? And what is it that we can put in place individually to kind of mitigate that risk a little bit? And so, there's a flurry of events that have sprung up. Okay, so go and attend, participate. And so the first one is attend reoccurring events that you had mentioned. That's a great way to go about it. What exactly did you have in mind when you put that?
So again, I think we kind of have to talk about, the normal world, which one day we will re-enter, and then there's the COVID world. So pre-COVID and post-COVID, one of the things that I did that was really amazing for my business was I joined what's called a BNI, which is a Business Networking International group. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was a very good school of networking, because basically what it is just a bunch of, professionals who sit around a table once a week, usually for breakfast. And the motto of the thing is givers gain. And so the whole goal is to try and give the other members of the group as many referrals as possible so that they can build their business, and that ultimately those people are engaged in the same activity to try to help you succeed.
Yeah.
And so for me, why this was so good, and one of the things I kind of wanted to get to today is also I'm kind of shy, and I really hated networking when I started. And like, you know, I had felt like this immense pressure that like you have to go to these networking events, and I would end up like feeling super socially awkward at like these big, you know, chambre de commerce
Yeah.
things where there's 100 people and you feel like, oh, you know, I have to go around and shake as many hands as possible as if like I'm the next incumbent like presidential hopeful, you know.
Yeah.
um but ultimately, like, that's kind of not the name of the game. Like,
Yeah.
you need to somehow seek out mutually beneficial relationships with people that you like, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
it's not like this thing where you feel like you have to be a politician with like shaking as many hands and
No.
smiling. No, no, you need to have like, first of all, the core network of people that are going to help you succeed. And
Hmm.
like, that's between like 5 and 10 people.
Yeah.
You know, like if I think of like the other professionals or other investors that I talk to on a regular basis, like I'm in contact with between five to 10 people, and it's closer to five
Hmm.
every single week, and like at least one phone call going back and forth with them every day, because that's like my sort of my go-to team, right? Like,
Hmm.
people call that a power team.
Yeah.
So one thing is to like try to put that structure in place, and then there's everything else around it, which like when you're kind of more in a construction phase, like then you need to be sort of extending feelers out to identify those people that, if you're looking to network for business purposes, like, how am I going to use their network and how are they going to use my network? So it
Hmm.
becomes looking for mutually beneficial relationships with people who have the same philosophy towards business as you do.
Yeah.
Because again, like once I you know, went out there and started meeting other people who were in the industry, some people don't work the way I do. You know, like, I'm not a bigger is better person.
Hmm.
I like to think of myself as someone ethical. You know,
Hmm.
I'm not in it for the money. I mean, we're all in it for the money, but in the real estate industry, there's a lot of people who are sharks.
Yep.
And so like maybe you're going to end up meeting those people and like your style or your way of doing things just doesn't match up, and that's
Hmm.
fine, right? Like, shake their hand and kind of move on. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, anyway.
No. So first of all, thank you very much because you perfectly reframed it a couple of minutes ago that, this is more of an episode about networking and how to go about it now. So it corresponds to one's personality because every style and every person is different. And you said at the beginning, like some want to go the politician way where they'll shake 80 hands out of 100 people that are there, have extremely shallow exchanges, but then nothing comes out of it. And I don't know for you, but I'd much rather have three meaningful conversations and actually walk away with a contact and be like, hey, you know what? Let's have lunch next week. Let's see what we can do together because I have a lot better of an opportunity to give, therefore to receive in doing that. So going back to the topic, like, yeah, networking has been hard this year. It's been really challenging, in fact. And but business continues, and real estate is a relationship-based business primarily, regardless of what other people might want to think. And so sometimes just attending smaller focused events that are really about you and what's important to you and your niche. And so do you have examples, for example, this year of events or activities you might have done like that?
Well, I mean, look, I guess I'm also like at this point in my career, like at a bit of a privileged position because I get to do live events where I have a contact with, you know, there's like sort of audience contact, right? Because like, let's say the Real Estate Investors Club podcast that I do, we always do it in a live format. And so even though I'm hosting, I kind of there's a bit of a back and forth with the audience. There's also a back and forth for me with the guests. But I mean, I don't necessarily want to advance that as a strategy because I feel like that's kind of like unique to like where am at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but perhaps like, you know, attending events like that, if you're like a little bit earlier on in your career, like if there are like speakers that you enjoy or you know, people like basically what's happened is that the like, I don't want to say the word influencer, but like, you know, whoever has something to say in the industry has gone online. Like, let's say you take, you know, Patrice Ménard, for example, like they have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff. They have a lot of their brokers. They have a lot of their different people who do presentations. And like, you know, because there's less face-to-face contact, we are now online. And I think like I would encourage people to just don't be shy about attending events by people who you like to listen to, and then reach out to them. Like, you
Yeah.
can reach out to them often. Like a lot of broadcasts will have, like, if you go to a live, you can like pop something in the comment box, and like if someone pops a good question in the comment box and then afterwards they follow up with me on Messenger, like I will definitely take the time to answer them.
Mm-hmm.
um So, in terms of like attending events, like I guess that would be more like try to be within the sphere of like people of influence within the field that you enjoy. And like one of the things that I've actually done this year is to just invest in coaching more.
Yeah.
A lot of people like are having online programs in a way that they didn't have before. And like I've done more online consulting, but I've also been a consumer of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like, people think that, oh, you get at a certain level and then you don't like educate yourself anymore. No, no, no.
No.
It's absolutely false because
Yeah.
like, let's say, the pyramid is like this, the higher you get, like if you want to move to another level, it's not like, let me just go out and sniff the roses for the next 6 months and think that I'm going to like level up my game like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. It's like, if, there are certain aspects where like I've hit a plateau. And if I
Mm-hmm.
want to move through that, I definitely have to seek out someone who's looking back from the other side and try to get over that. So like this last year, I have spent the entire time in coaching of some kind.
Yeah.
So like, even if maybe those like more like the spider web network is not so easy to put in place, like definitely getting access to people whose opinion you might value or who can help you level up. We have access to that in a way we never did before.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of building knowledge, like that's definitely
Yeah, and
there.
you're absolutely right. Like within the last year, everyone who had something to say that was worthy, so to speak, it may not be the message I'm looking for, but has gone online. And so now on the consumer side, we have access to a lot more people that we didn't, and it's been systematized, it's been packaged, so it's much easier for us to consume. And I like to think everyone took advantage of it, but we both know that's not the reality. And some just stayed home and watched movies all day, and that's it. I'm glad to hear you say that because I feel the same. And sometimes I'm like, oof, I spent quite a bit on coaching this year. But at the same time, it's been a springboard, and it always helps. And whether to meet someone else, and then you end up meeting a partner, and then you do business together, and so on and so forth. So, is there anything else out of this year and I was going to say the not lockdown, but the pandemic situation that forced you to evolve in a way that you didn't see coming before?
Yeah, I mean, I think also we kind of alluded to this a bit off camera, definitely like for me launching like the Real Estate Investors Club podcast and now like my passion project, which is the Mindful Wealth podcast that we're actually launching tomorrow. That's definitely new initiatives.
Yeah.
Had there not been a pandemic, I would never have launched a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That for me was kind of like my way of reaching out and trying to make sense of like the crisis when it was a crisis, to try and like understand the world around me. So I think, for me, that was one, let's say, silver lining. On the less positive side, like for me, like this year socially, it's been a real struggle, and like being a mom with a young kid, like I was stuck at home a lot. And, like the 5 people that I saw through the year, because whatever, everybody has their own attitude to how closely they followed restrictions. But I had
Mm-hmm.
like a group of like 5 people, friends, whatever, that I continued to see. And like, man, we were not doing well.
Nope.
And like,
Mm-hmm.
even though aspects of your life, like even though the podcast was evolving, even though like, in my business has been quite successful this last year, like with the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that was going on in my head was not the best all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think that like some of that is also to realize that like cut yourself some slack, like in situations like this, like, yes, you can turn some of it to your advantage, but you also don't need to be putting this constant pressure on yourself to be on your A game when the world is like falling apart around you. Like, maybe, and I'm not going to get it right, but like Jordan Peterson has this quote that's something like, you want to strive to be the person that gets looked to at your father's funeral. Right.
Yeah.
And like, sometimes when stuff is going to around me, like
Yeah.
that's what I say to myself, like, let me try to be my best self in a bad situation. And it's not going to be Terrie on her A game on an A day, but it's going to be the best you can do given a certain situation. So
Yeah. I really like what you said about cut yourself some slack, and that's something that my wife reminds me of sometimes. Like, hey, slow down, man. It's okay. Yeah, there's all these things you want to do, but like, take a chill pill. And you mentioned something earlier also about surrounding yourself with people that that you care about, that you like. And it may sound really obvious, but I found there's so much to be transferred into the workplace and into our businesses. And the very basic quote from Warren Buffett, like, people like to do business with people they like. It's that simple. So just be a likable person. Do what you said you were going to do. Check in once in a while. Like, you don't have to be best buddies. Doesn't mean you can't be nice. It doesn't. It's no more expensive.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's also something to say about, like a given style. Like, let's say, I think the real estate industry, like we know fairly well up to now, there are all kinds of different operators. And some of them are perhaps a bit lower down on the ethical scale. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other people who, are very good at the game who I just don't want to do business with them because we're just not the same kind of animals in that particular environment. And it's one thing of being nice and being out for the other guy. And I think, like, obviously you don't want to approach a relationship with what can I get out of this,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to kind of realize that things are a two-way street. But at the same time, like, it's easier to have that kind of two-way street with someone that you just share whatever whatever your basic values are and whatever is the way that you are with your clients. And like,
Yeah.
I find that that's kind of happened for me naturally over time, is that, like, let's say if I have this sphere, like sometimes people will come into the sphere and they'll like kind of hover there, and then either they get ejected or else they come in.
Mm-hmm.
And like, for sure at the beginning, when you don't have that set up, like there's a lot more coming in and coming out, and maybe, some people will either disappoint you or like whatever it is. But like, if you stick with that, you will eventually have this kind of like halo of like-minded people who do things in a way that you're comfortable with and like reflect your way of doing business. And like, it's such a pleasure for me now when I like refer those people around me to my clients, because I know it's going to go well.
Yeah.
And like, sometimes I'm almost excited to be like, oh, I can't wait till like my client picks up the phone and talks to like my favorite real estate broker or like my favorite mortgage broker, because like I know exactly how that's going to go before it happens.
Yeah. And you have the confidence that that mortgage broker is going to take really good care of that client, even though he doesn't know him or anything. But like, as you said, like, you have that common set of values that makes such a difference at the beginning. And I'm so glad you said that, because I tend to function that way, and which has also led to I wouldn't say major, but yeah, it's major disappointments sometimes. But hey, it is what it is. And as you said, those people eventually get, well, it's not that they get pushed out; they usually walk themselves out of the circle.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think while we're on the topic of networking, like maybe I want to share just one other point that like really sort of shifted things for me when I understood like maybe the science of networking. Because I think like as somebody who's a bit shy and like I always like, felt like I was not good at networking. But I think one of the things that really clicked for me is like when you understand that you're trying to get to people who you share like a common goal somehow, or you share a common clientele. So let's say, for me, like I built my business as a property manager. That was kind of like how I entered the real estate world. Like I was, I've been an investor, but like I really built my business around property management. And so when I understood that the other people who have the similar client base as me are entrepreneurs, real estate agents, notaries, accountants, like people who focus around like the real estate field, that like their clientele is my clientele. And so that means that like if when I meet one of those people and I feel like we have a little click, and like I always like to like make the parallel to dating without it getting creepy.
Yeah,
like
you're
sometimes
absolutely right.
like you're out in the field and like you meet somebody, and like let's say you meet a building inspector on someone else's inspection, and the guy comes in and like you spend 2 hours with that person combing through an apartment. You're like, wow, like I like that person's vibe. Like, okay, let me get his card, and then let me afterwards like set up, before we used to go to lunch, but like now this last year, like it's possible to set up a Zoom call or like an outside coffee, whatever you want to do, but like follow up on that if you feel like there's going to be some kind of mutually beneficial relationship that can grow out of something. Like when you have a little click like that, don't be shy, like if when I've had people do that in the reverse, like I always have time for those interactions, because we can always use another inspector, another real estate agent, another somebody who like wants to vehicle whatever we're doing, right? So
and that might not be for now. You may not have that need or that necessity now, but it might be 3 to 6 months from now. And it's funny when you say that. It's kind of like dating. Is I don't want to say make the parallel, but sometimes I've used, for me, like the a gauge of like, oh yeah, we clicked and all that, but like, would I invite him to a family barbecue? And then sometimes yes, sometimes no, and sometimes it's no, but they're very friendly to work with. There's nothing wrong with that. But then there's so many where I'm like, yeah, and in fact, like I'd introduce him to my parents. I'd be more than happy and proud. And then this is when I know like, oh yeah, I'd love to do something with this person, like partnership or business or what. Like absolutely, let's go all out. And as you said, it really goes down to being able to identify that we have that common set of values at the get-go, that this is how we work, and and we share this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, like if I were to summarize it, like common values and then common interests,
Yeah.
right? Because like ultimately, like if I meet, let's say I give an example, like let's say I meet someone who is I don't know, maybe even a kinesiologist is not a good example, but like someone who does something that has nothing to do, like a vegan bakery, okay? Like that
Yeah.
like
Yeah. That's an example. Disclaimer,
let
it's
me
an
not speak
example.
ill of the vegans today. But like let's say, I mean, like
Yeah.
in terms of, my interests and the stuff that I do, like that's not going to be, even though I might click with that person, like I don't know that in terms of what we're trying to do professionally, there's much overlap. But somebody who's more in my like sphere of influence, like it's
Mhm.
going to be interesting right away. If I meet someone who's in like sports and healthcare on the one hand, or I meet somebody who's in real estate in some capacity, like those are two groups of people who I might find alignment with. And
Yeah.
then after that, it's a question of, do our personalities and our values match up? So.
Mhm. And then you had mentioned in your post like how to maintain that relationship and that network, because yeah, over time we meet people and what once in a while we stay in touch and stuff, but like it's so easy to go in your phone and realize you have 900 contacts and you haven't spoken to 850 of them in a year.
Yeah, but I mean, I think this is also like, let's mention first of all, we haven't spoken about social media, and I think that there's two important things to talk about with social media, and I think that one of the great things about like being connected to these social networks is that for maintaining professional relationships, it's really great.
Hmm.
Like I'm a bit of an efficiency junkie, and like I heard stories earlier on in my career about people who spend from 9 to 12 every day on the phone, like basically touching base with their network. And like I'm too much of an efficiency junkie for that. Like I can have a 15-minute conversation with maybe 2 3 people once a week, but like I'm certainly not going to spend 3 hours on the phone.
No.
But another way of doing that is like, let's say every day I spend like whatever 15 20 minutes on LinkedIn, 15 20 minutes on Instagram, 15 20 minutes on Facebook, and like see what other people are doing and comment on their posts, and
Hmm.
check in. Like if somebody's like commenting on my Instagram stuff, or they just share a comment on LinkedIn, it's going to like bring them top of mind for me, and I'm going to sort of be able to observe what they're doing, and then we remain in each other's halo without
Yeah.
maybe necessarily taking an hour out of the day. And like, yeah, for sure those phone calls are important, and I think like once we start going out into the world again, like those business lunches, those kind of like more in-person events are going to be important. But like I think we're at an unparalleled place with social media to be able to like just maintain those relationships kind of in a way that's even goal directed, because like it's so easy to go on social media and just like waste time, like
Oh
go down
yeah.
some kind of rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
like if you go on there intentionally and say, I'm going to now go and massage my network, I'm now going to just go and like touch some of those people who are important to me, or who I want to maintain that relationship, that's I think a great way to do it.
Hmm.
And I mean, the other comment I want to make just about social media is in terms of like even maybe more proactively building a network. Like we have access, like LinkedIn, for example, is an incredible resource. Like you have access to like the world's smartest minds through there.
Yeah.
And like, be it for the podcast or be it like for, when I'm looking for coaches at this stage, like I just go around in that world and then like try to talk to people. And if
Hmm.
you admire someone, like you have access to like an incredible amount of people. And like I
Hmm.
just think really want to encourage people, like don't be shy
Yeah.
to reach out to someone who's an expert in a field, or someone who's a bit further ahead of you in the game in something. And just like everybody loves to receive fan mail. Like you're not
Hmm.
going to eat up 45 minutes of their time necessarily, but like if you hit them with like just, oh hey, I like what you're doing, whatever, like those things stick in your
Yeah.
mind. And like when I have people then after 6 months 8 months, they want to ask me a question or want to have my opinion on something, like sure, I'll take 5 minutes to answer it.
Yeah.
So
And it's funny you mentioned LinkedIn, because there's been a lot of evolution, well, within the 10 years that social networks exist, but like on LinkedIn, like professionals put themselves out there. They don't put themselves out there for no reason. It's not to put a cute picture of themselves. It's because they want the visibility, because they want to attract business, because they're looking for ventures, because all that. So as you said, reach out. And I've sometimes been actually greatly surprised by how responsive some of these people have been. And I remember like reaching out to someone. I actually interviewed him for the podcast, and then I hung up the phone. And I was like, "Oh my god, I can't believe he said yes." And the guy was totally casual about it, like, "Yeah, sure, let me know when," and stuff. And it's wow, and it's such a it's an encouragement that goes both ways, because as you said, it's always nice also to get some positive feedback from people out there.
Yeah, and to also like, when somebody calls me up and it's like, Terrie, I really want your opinion on this. Like, if I have 5 minutes, like, why would I not just share my opinion? Like,
Yeah.
Okay, my
Yeah.
opinion's of value. It's okay.
And you must have seen that. So you are the author of the Mindful Landlord that came out a few years ago. You must have had a lot of positive feedback from that. Can you kind of describe what your experience was?
Um, maybe not as much as you might think. Like sometimes it's actually funny because like sometimes there's like an email that comes out of nowhere for like someone who's read the book, like someone in the US or someone in Canada, like that I've had no relationship with whatsoever. And then I always have this funny moment where I'm like, wow, that's so crazy. Like this person like ordered my book on Amazon and like now they're writing to me and like
Yeah.
maybe I changed something in how they think and like I mean that's why I wrote the book, right? Like because
Yeah.
it's really awesome. But at the same time, like even from maybe like the network that's a little bit closer, maybe not as much feedback as I would have liked or expected. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I guess I would have like liked more of like the immediate network to call me up and be like, even just call me on stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like for sure, everything I wrote in there is not true, and for sure, I didn't take the time to think through every single point in the best way possible. So like, argue with me about what's written on page
Yeah.
30. Like,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, let me know. And this is where I heard it's hard with books, because you write this at one moment,
Yeah.
but then if you were to make corrections 3 years later, you'd probably change half of it. So
Yeah.
it's tough, because it's content that you put out there at one instant, and then it's kind of fixed and permanent. But
Yeah.
yeah, and so that was coming out a lot of your property management experience. And I'm sure you have like tons of funny stories and stuff, and probably not going to take your time about that now, but it must have been a real growth experience, and which I guess allowed you now to partner up with the Mindful Wealth to create the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, like for sure, the experience of writing a book was really amazing. Like I wrote a PhD thesis, whatever, 10 years ago, and that was not an amazing experience, but at all.
But you chose the topic.
No, I chose the topic, but like academia, anyways, that's a
Yeah,
whole other
yeah.
thing. Academia has turned
It's another world.
into something that I think is not necessarily the force for good that it once was.
Yeah.
But writing the book on like a topic that you care about, where you get to just explore these ideas, and like, I'll give you one example of something that like was really amazing. I wrote a chapter on what to do with like rent non-payment and collections, and like charity versus the moral hazard.
Mm-hmm.
And like that really blew my mind, because I guess like I've always brought to my business this idea that if the tenants don't pay, or if they do something, you have to like immediately put them in touch with the consequences of their actions. Like I'm all about consequences, and I figure like I'm just phone company. You don't pay your rent,
boom,
out,
yeah,
and
yeah.
boom. Exactly. But then, at the same time, if you really extrapolate that out and you think like, okay, well, like let's say spiritually you're trying to evolve, like an important part of that is charity and like helping those that are less fortunate. So at what point does it become the moral hazard, where you are basically enabling a behavior that's bad? And at what point are you actually doing proactive charity of like helping somebody out who's in a pinch? And then like obviously to see the denouement of that, you're going to actually have to read the book, buy the book and read the chapter. Yeah. But like picking that apart was like a real, like a growth moment for me, because you have to also evaluate, well, like, no, maybe it's not that simple. And before I put something out there that a lot of people are going to read and maybe take my opinion on something, I would hate to put something damaging out there that's going to make people make bad decisions, because ultimately, like ethically, that's your responsibility. When you start talking in front of people, you have to make sure that like what you're saying is not going to make the world worse, because otherwise I should just shut up right now.
That's a good way to summarize it.
Yeah, no, but for
Yeah.
real.
You mean you feel a sense of responsibility?
Yeah.
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 And I think like that's kind of a nice segue into with the Mindful Wealth podcast that's actually launching tomorrow, which really grew out of this relationship that I had with the writer of the book Mindful Money. So I teamed up with this author from California called Jonathan Dio. And like really by reading his book, I discovered that we had just such similar attitudes to and preoccupations with, building wealth and creating money. And the fact that like seeking for, material wealth and achievement, like it's an amazing project for growth, but at the same time, you have to be so careful to do it in, a responsible and an ethical way, and to do it in such a way that even personally doesn't destroy your family, doesn't destroy you, because an abundance of ambition, like being a slave to too much ambition, can really make you destructive to everything that's around you. And so like the I guess the purpose of that podcast, or what we're hoping to do with it, is to really like explore some of those themes and like think about, okay, holistically, how does the quest for wealth fit into a full life?
Mm-hmm.
And when I go out there and like, try to make a buck in the real estate industry, or in financial investing or whatever, what is the meaning of that, and how do I place it within a responsible full life?
Yeah. Yeah, and that measure of full life may be different for everyone. And so what does success mean to you? Like, at what point are you still working for money? At what point do you how do you measure your happiness, your time? And kind of circling back to the beginning of the conversation with the pandemic, I think it's opened a lot of eyes in terms of, I work for money to cover all these basic needs, but then really I don't really have time. And now I'm at home and I kind of do have the time, but am I really that happier? Like, or I've heard people say I'd be actually, much happier working less, making less, but having more time with my kids to do fun stuff. And so to me, that is one of the measures of true success, in fact.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like, again, you have to like listen to, the podcast for the full like exploration of this, but that there are, let's say, various like pillars of human life, or various like domains in which we self-actualize, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that like the financial domain is one, achievement is another. And like when you say, that everyone has kind of different goals, I mean, I think part of it is also knowing why you're doing specific things. And like, I guess for me, like the real estate industry was never about the bank account Olympics for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for some people it is about that. Like,
Yeah.
I have a brother who's like an incredibly successful tech entrepreneur. And like, we always joke because, like you really don't need any more money. And he's like, yeah, it's not about the money for me. It's about how far can I push the package in this specific game. And I'm like, yeah, I totally get that. Like for me, I had a life in combat sports. And like for me, chasing after medals and seeing like how far can I get up on that like world podium, like for me, that was where a lot of like my ambition went.
Yeah.
And so like, just getting kind of checking in with yourself and knowing, like, am I playing this game for financial freedom? Am I playing it because I want to win the bank account Olympics? Like, it's not that there's a wrong answer, but it's good to know which one it is, because then you're not going to sacrifice things to those, whatever, to the god of money, if that's not really what you're after in the end, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm actually really excited for this podcast. Okay, it's coming out. It's starting tomorrow. That's beginning of June. This episode will air around end of June. So by the time this airs, there's already some episodes. Go subscribe. Go listen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Perfect. Wow, I know I could continue on for quite a while. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest thing is just to like follow me on social media. I have a website, terrieschauer.com, where you can kind of get access to, I have a newsletter, I have a recommended readings list. You can purchase the book through the website. And then if you want to kind of stay updated, well, we have like a regular, whatever, newsletter that goes out about every 2 weeks. And then on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, if you follow Terrie Schauer, you'll get all the updates.
Perfect. And to go subscribe to the podcast.
Mindful Wealth podcast. Yeah, for
Mindful Wealth podcast. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate the your time and the wisdom.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. It's always good to have these conversations.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. All right. And for everyone else listening out there, thank you for joining today. As always, please subscribe, send me some feedback, send me some comments. I always love to hear from you. And it also helps in getting some quality guests. So there you go. Have a wonderful day and talk to you next week. Ciao, ciao.